So I normally don't make videos kind of haphazardly like this, usually a little bit more calculated and use scripts. But I saw this article written by a cultural Marxist secular Jewish journalist. Big surprise there. And it's basically a postmodernist reinterpretation of Viking history in an attempt to demonize the growing racial and ethnic nationalist movements that are occurring as a result of globalization and the engineered attempt to destroy European nations and identity. So here you have this person who claims to be both a journalist and a historian, Erika Harlitz-Kern Oeve. And the title is Weaponizing History, which is actually, ironically, what she is doing. What the alt-right gets wrong about the Vikings. Viking Age Scandinavians were immigrants who traded with the Muslim world and embraced gender fluidity, everything the alt-right despises. Now, I don't actually consider myself to be alt-right. I don't even think that there's such a thing. I'm an ethnic nationalist. I'm a nativist. I'm a traditionalist. I'm a lot of different things. I don't think that alt-right can actually encompass what I think or what I believe. I think that the alt-right is a term that was created to demonize and create a blanket term, a political term for all of these ideologies that the globalist, leftist, Judeo-Masonic media intends to demonize and wants to destroy. So here you have this imagery with a Viking, what is prototypically viewed as a Viking helmet, which actually isn't a Viking helmet. Vikings didn't wear helmets with horns. So this is hilarious that this person who claims to be a historian actually used this imagery and then uses a MAGA hat also to just kind of conflate and associate Trumpism with the alt-right, which is kind of hilarious, honestly, because Trump is a Zionist and the alt-right is extremely against Zionism and Jewry. So, of course, it premises the article with, after the horrific mass shooting in El Paso, it can no longer be denied that white supremacy is a deadly force in American society, and then they go straight into the Charlottesville crap. And then this person uses historians, academics throughout this as citing academics, and what they're essentially doing is they're just using other cultural Marxists like this Kathleen Belew. I don't know who the hell she is or what she does, but history is another academic discipline that has been infiltrated by cultural Marxists. So what you have is people who have been trained to view history through the lens of critical theory and cultural Marxism, and constantly view history through the some kind of reinterpretation and looking at women and minorities and the power dynamics within history and all these different things. So that's essentially what you have here, is these cultural Marxist historians now. And it's really sad because history actually used to be a very honorable discipline. And I studied history, and I didn't see a whole lot of that. Even though I went to an extremely left-wing university, I didn't see a whole lot of that type of cultural Marxist reinterpretation. So Belew points out that what unites many of these extremist acts of violence is the publishing of a manifesto. Manifestos, the perpetrators explain the reasons for their actions based on their worldview. It's called A Weaponization of History by Michael Livingston. So he starts to talk about Ragnar Redbeard and might is right, survival of the fittest. And then it says the fetishizing of Vikings is central to the ideology of white supremacy. But the white supremacist view of the Vikings is another example of their weaponization of history. In many ways, the Vikings were the antithesis of what the alt-right stands for. So, then they go into basically saying that Vikings are not not an actual ethnic group or something. It's a job description, which is somewhat accurate, but it's a simplification. Vikings were Norse raiders. Raiding was not a job, really. It was a way of life. It was something that they did to honor their traditions and their civilization and to go and obtain wealth and glory and honor. While it's true that Viking is not an ethnic distinction, all of the people who were Vikings were ethnically extremely similar, racially extremely similar. So it wasn't just a job. So then it goes on to say, Viking Age civilization or society was patriarchal just like ours. But in contrast to what the alt-right claims men and women both had status, I don't think that anybody would actually claim that women did not have status within Viking Age Norse society. So that's largely a straw man and a gross misrepresentation of the views of the people she's trying to slander. Nobody, I don't think, that represents ethnic nationalism, European nationalism, or traditionalism would claim that women had no status within Norse culture. And it goes on about this historical, some woman that commissioned a runestone because she had agency over her own finances or something ridiculous like that. Feminist theory imbued into this historical interpretation. The strict division of labor between men and women coexisted with what seems to have been a gender that incorporated both the male and the female. Evidence of fluid gender boundaries can also be found in Norse mythology. Irrelevant. Loki, the trickster, shape-shifted into a mare and gave birth. God. Viking Age Scandinavia was part of a trade network that reached from the English Channel to the Persian Gulf, which brought goods. So again, here they're trying to paint Vikings and Scandinavians as some kind of globalists that were immigrants to different areas, that were multicultural, that didn't have their own sense of tribal identity and beliefs, and they were just these gender fluid multicultural globalists. So the resurgence of Norse mythology in the form of Asatru has attracted followers from the alt-right who follow a racist and misogynist version of it. No. Norse paganism is not racist or misogynist. It is just an ethnic religion. So it is something that really cannot be practiced by somebody who does not have Scandinavian ancestry, because that would just be ridiculous, because it's an ethnic form of religion. It's not a globalist ideology, like one of the Abrahamic religions that can be practiced by any type of ethnicity or group. It would be kind of like some ethnic Slav, like a Pole or a Russian, practicing Celtic paganism or something. Without Celtic ancestry, practicing Celtic paganism is kind of ridiculous. And she starts going on about Snorri Sturluson and saying that that Odin brought his people out of Asia to search for a new place to live, and so essentially trying to frame the Norse as not indigenous to Scandinavia, and trying to say that they're some kind of Asian immigrants or something per the mythology, and that's where the Aesir and Asgard, the names, came from. And it starts to talk about this idea that we all think that Scandinavians were pagans. They were overwhelmingly pagan in the Viking Age. There were some Christians, but they were mostly pagans. the Christianization of Norway started to take place around 1000, and there was some Christian kings, especially Danish kings before then, but yeah, most Vikings were pagan. So here it says Viking Age Scandinavians were raiders turned immigrants who became completely assimilated into their new cultures. False. Viking Age Scandinavians, you could even see the ones that went to different areas, like the ones that went and established the Kievan Rus. They remained an aristocratic class in the Kievan Rus. They did not assimilate completely into their new societies. They spoke the language, they had most of the cultural traits, but they wanted to remain distinct within those societies. So that's false. If it weren't for the introduction of certain Scandinavian dietary practices, there's hardly any evidence left of their presence. Give me a fucking break. Are you kidding me? There's evidence of their presence in the genome of all the areas that they went and colonized. Not to mention, there's mountains of archaeological evidence. Also, they have close contacts with the Muslim world. So here we have this postmodernist, neo-Marxist reinterpretation trying to basically this is trying to shill for the Muslim invasion of Europe and Sweden in particular. They had close contacts with the Muslim world. They had Arab coins. Irrelevant. Irrelevant. That does not mean that they were multicultural or they did not consider themselves to be a unique group of people. And it says this exchange and interaction brings us to the final point. Viking Age Scandinavians were not tall, blonde, and blue-eyed. They were not, or they were not all tall, blonde, and blue-eyed. I beg to differ that there were not tall, blonde, and blue-eyed Vikings. I think that that's absolutely ridiculous, especially when you look at the phenotypes of current Scandinavians. It's just something that you can't even possibly deny that there were blonde, tall, blue-eyed Vikings. So this is essentially, by saying something like that, what this journalist, this subversive left-wing journalist, is trying to do is trying to steal that phenotypic identity, essentially, from ethnic nationalists, saying that no, these people who you thought were these Hyperborean, tall, blonde, blue-eyed superhumans were in fact not, and because Thor was depicted as a redhead, the idea of a Viking warrior as the finest specimen of manhood took place. So they're basically trying to say that the idea that the Norse were a badass race of people and that they were a fine specimen of manhood has to do with racism and Nordicism. Apparently, these people have never seen Icelanders before. That overwhelmingly are overrepresented in feats of strength. Look at the mountain from Game of Thrones. I can't remember his name. Halfthor, I think, is his name. Look at the size of that man. Iceland, by the way, has a population of about 330,000, which is about the size of Fort Lauderdale metropolitan area in Florida, maybe Flint, Michigan, something like that. When you're talking about this population size and the amount of World's Strongest Man titles that they have, not to mention their overrepresentation in beauty contests and things of that nature, Iceland it's basically a genetic time capsule for Viking Age Scandinavia. There's some Gaelic admixture there too, but the base Icelandic genome is about 90% Scandinavian and 10% Irish Gaelic. And a lot of them descend from Viking Age Scandinavians. And so the genes there are they're apparent. You look at the size of the people, the average strength. of these huge people that come from this place, and the average beauty of these people, and it cannot be denied. Of course, Viking Age Scandinavians were what we today would call white, but their skin color comes from the fact that they lived in and around the Arctic. Yeah, so they're just trying to make it seem like race is just skin color here. That's a typical neo-Marxist way to try to destroy white identitarianism. Their fighting abilities developed because they lived in a violent society, blah, blah, irrelevant. These things don't make the Vikings superior to anyone else. It just makes them typical for the time. Well, if they were so fucking typical, then why did they go around dominating everybody? Why did they go all the way to Persia? And why did they go, if they weren't superior in any way, how did they have such fine seamanship? How did they have such great warriors, renowned warriors? What they were was they were excellent warriors. They were excellent mariners. They were excellent merchants. They were excellent explorers. They were excellent rulers. They were an excellent group of people, period. And to try to make it seem like just because they were excellent that they're somehow superior to everybody else, that's not the point. Vikings wouldn't, just like the samurai or some other group of people, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're superior, that they're admired. And the whole point of this article is to just try to destroy and demonize identitarianism. So what they try to do is bastardize our history, make it seem as though the groups that we're descended from did not consider themselves to be distinct, unique groups, to try to marginalize these groups as if they were not excellent and something to admire and be proud of if you were descended from these groups. When a group has no pride in their history, they have no pride in their future. They have no pride in being a unique group and preserving their group identity by preserving bastions within the world where that group's identity can be protected. They want us to surrender. They want us to succumb to being disintegrated. They want us to have no countries of our own. And the way that they do this oftentimes is to try to destroy our history and our identity and our pride in who we are, and especially who we descend from. And I have an archived link in the description for this video if you'd like to reference it or read it. So unsurprisingly, this same journalist who writes for the Daily Beast, by the way, which is edited by this guy, Noah Schachtman, Oive, she also wrote this wonderful piece. Give Notre Dame a modern roof the alt-right will hate. Medieval Europe was a crossroads of global influence, not a mythical all-white past. The new Notre Dame should reflect that. Okay? So this is another cultural Marxist, postmodernist reinterpretation of what history was, what Middle Age Europe was, which was a 99% white, 99% ethnically homogenous society. Middle Age or medieval France, when the Notre Dame Cathedral was built, and there was other times where the cathedral was added onto, but it was built in the Middle Ages. And even in 18th and 19th century Europe, France was overwhelmingly homogeneous and was in the high 90 percentiles of ethnically French, racially European, and religiously Catholic or Christian. So this postmodernist reinterpretation is using a cultural Marxist framework to look at history and argue that the Notre Dame Cathedral should be rebuilt with some kind of roof that is more representative of France's diversity and the postmodernist kind of architectural globalist it's for everybody, therefore it's for nobody kind of mentality. So this disgusting, subversive individual says the whole idea of Western civilization is basically tandem with nationalism and a growing conviction of Europeans' superiority. So her, her argument is that history itself is a discipline. It's fundamentally linked to nationalism and white supremacy. And then more bullshit, cultural Marxist academics talking about basically linking modernity and the Middle Ages and all kinds of different things to racial white supremacy. And so basically saying that nothing that is in our past, nothing that's historical at all, no previous interpretation of history can be understood at all or looked at or labeled without it having some kind of racial supremacist type of connotation. So then you have this other anti-Western philosopher who says the term West is used to contrast to something else. So it's kind of the othering kind of thing, right? Western, so it's just basically demonizing Western civilization, Judeo-Christian values. The Middle Ages stand out as the ideal period when Europe was a white society united in a homogeneous Christian culture led by one single Christian institution. Yeah, I mean, pretty much that's what it was. So, such a view is inaccurate. In fact, it is considered to be what is considered to be European culture in the past and present is an amalgamation of impulses. She used the same word, impulses, and basically, which is a neo-Marxist deconstructionist newspeak term that she's using for culture and race and these different things. She uses impulses from all around the world. She's trying to say that Middle Age Europe and European culture is multicultural and it's multiracial and there's all these different influences. Anybody who ever advances that argument that because there are different influences to, say, English culture, for instance, because there are different influences that it is not its own unique culture, it's a continuum fallacy. That's what it's actually called, and it's the same thing as basically saying that purple doesn't exist because it's a mixture of red and blue. Essentially, it's the same kind of concept, and it's a completely illogical statement. Even though the Catholic Church was a dominating religious institution in the Middle Ages, it did not have a monopoly on religion. So that's basically just trying to say that it was multi-religious. And all of this is going into her argument for why it should be changed, and it should be some kind of postmodernist abomination that they replace on there, which is not a representation of European history and culture and Western Christian tradition, but the new roof of the cathedral needs to be adapted to the techniques and challenges of our era and is called for by the evolution of history. So this is the idea that destroying European history and replacing it with some kind of meaningless globalist mentality, that this is somehow an evolution, that multiculturalism and multiracialism and the destruction of Europe is a progress. It's progress. It's an evolution. It's just natural. Yeah. So not at all surprising that this disgusting excuse for a human being is trying to demonize Viking identity and basically tie it to supremacism, is the same kind of person who wants to install some kind of anti-French, anti-Catholic, anti-Western, anti-European, anti-white, postmodernist reinterpretation of a fundamentally European and Western monument. So anyway, I just wanted to cover this particularly disgusting and evil cultural Marxist activist who's masquerading as a journalist for this disgusting subversive media outlet, and expose all the theoretical framework and the ideals and the agenda that's behind anti-white reinterpretations of history, which essentially is to demonize and deconstruct and disintegrate European racial and ethnic identity. So I hope you have a good weekend, and I'll have another video coming out pretty soon covering my master's thesis that I wrote and submitted in May. Have a good weekend.